Back in 2009, I went to visit my sister in Pascagoula, Mississippi. I spent a whole week over there. All week long, we went to visit casinos, beaches, and a lot of beautiful scenic parks. I used my cell phone to take pictures of the beautiful views, and it was one of those places that I dropped my cell phone by accident and damaged it. So after cursing back and forth, I borrowed my sister's cell phone to call the phone company and ask for a replacement. After a few chit-chats, we finally came to an agreement with the cell phone company, and they decided to deliver a replacement cell phone to my hometown of McAllen, Texas. So in the meantime, I was without a cell phone. On the day of returning home, I arrived and my sister dropped me at the bus station to go buy a ticket for my return home. After purchasing the tickets, I had to wait for the bus to arrive. The first bus trip was from Mississippi to Mobile, Alabama to Louisiana. The trip was in 2 hours. I hated to wait seated for 2 hours before boarding the next bus. After 20 minutes of being seated and bored because I had no cell phone to play at least games, I decided to go get something to eat at a burger stand. After enjoying a delicious meal, I stepped into the bus station's restroom to wash my hands, and that's when my experience started. As I was washing my hands, I glanced through the restroom mirror because a man entered the restroom, and my eyes couldn't deceive what I saw. There standing at the door was a man with the same features. A man resembling me. Another version of me. Thinking it was my mirror reflection, but impossible because my other me was wearing different clothing. I remember I was wearing a yellow t-shirt with a winter black jacket cause it was still cold. And the other me was wearing a green button long-sleeved shirt. Also, he was so shocked that we both stood frozen for a couple of minutes trying to realize everything was real. So after a couple of moments of being frozen in amazement, I decided to break the ice and started to talk. I said, "Hi, who are you?" To where he said the same thing, "Who are you?" We had the same voice. It was as if our voices echoed in the confined restroom space. So I asked his name, and I remember him telling me still in shock. So he also asked me for my name. He assumed I was of Hispanic heritage. I assumed he didn't speak any Spanish. So when we shook hands after introducing ourselves, when we made skin contact, I felt an electric sensation all over my body. After both coming out of the restroom, we started to chat in disbelief that we had just met each other's double. I started to ask him a lot of questions about his descendants and all that stuff. He told me he lived in Maine and came to visit some friends in Alabama. I wanted to take a photo so I could have proof, but we had no cell phone, not even him. So we exchanged information so we could meet at a future date. After chit-chatting a while, we said goodbye with a big hug cause his bus arrived and he departed. I still stayed there waiting for my bus to arrive. I couldn't come out of shock thinking maybe I must have dozed off and dreamed the whole thing, but I had his information on a piece of paper with his number, and once I got home I was to call him. Also, a black man approached me and asked me if he was my twin brother because he said, "Damn, you guys look very alike." I said that I had just run into my double and he walked away in amazement. Finally, my bus arrived and boarded it, so on my way home, I reached into my pocket to take a look at the piece of paper, and to my bad luck, it was gone. How could I have lost such an important thing? When I arrived home, I told my parents about the experience I had, but they had a hard time believing me. I asked my mom if she didn't remember seeing 2 babies when I was born, and she said she was conscious the whole time she was giving birth to me. So after many years, I wonder if I'll ever see my double again. Shame on me. How could I have lost that important piece of paper? It was May 26, 2000, and the school year had come to a close. That evening, I was going to the graduation ceremony with my good friend Pat to show some love to our buddies in the class above us. The ceremony itself was like any graduation ceremony in South Texas, long and warm. After the ceremony, we got to chatting with some folks and then decided to get a bite to eat before heading up to Pat's house. I was spending the night because I was helping his family move the next day. Patrick and his family lived out past 107 on 8 Mile. It was pretty far from the school and it was very secluded and dark. They had found a house just around the corner from the school and near civilization. After eating, we headed to Patrick's house. It was a mix of rural neighborhoods and orchards. There was always someone somewhere that claims to have seen a ghost or knew someone that had an episode where they encountered something spooky. On this night, it was nothing out of the usual. It must have been around 9 p.m. or so, and it had been a long day. Patrick and I had been chatted out, I guess, and fell into a quiet spell in the car. Music was playing, and we were just listening to that. I noticed a truck riding my tail in my rear view. I knew he wanted to pass me, but it was a two-lane road, one going north and the other going south. As this truck did so, a car was coming southbound at the same time. It happened fast, and I thought for sure there was going to be a huge accident. But nothing happened. There was no screeching tire sound or loud impact. I checked the rear view and saw the taillights of the car going southbound, but there was no truck. It vanished in that split second. I sat in silence for a moment before looking at Patrick. Maybe I was just tired and making it up, but as I looked at him, he said, "Did you see that?" And we both did a double take in the mirrors. Something did happen, and we couldn't explain it. We sat in silence for a few moments more, trying to process what we had just seen. That truck had to have gone somewhere, but we just don't know where. There was no explanation as to what happened to that truck. The next day, we drove by there again while we were moving furniture from one house to another. We checked for skid marks or wreckage. We checked for some hidden entrance. We tried to make sense of everything, but we just couldn't. I've driven through there several times since, trying to see if I would encounter the same thing again, only to find disappointment. It's been plaguing me to this day. One cold and foggy night many years ago, my wife and I were cruising around due to the fact that we both were on vacation and had a bonus check. That means with money in my pocket, we decided to have a nice road trip. So off we went to visit many places. Since we purchased an atlas and a gas store, we decided to go along and make that road trip. My wife came up with the idea of tracing a circle pattern in the atlas map, so following that circle pattern we went to San Antonio, also went to visit the children of the railroad tracks. After that we went to Marfa, Texas to visit the Marfa lights and so on. After 5 days of a road trip, I was very exhausted from driving. So on our way back home, we decided to drive back at dusk to avoid all the afternoon traffic. So as we were driving back home, night fell upon us, and with almost 3 hours left to get home, we started to get hungry. So I told my wife to start looking for a place to eat. Being almost midnight and cold and almost foggy, we spotted a big neon sign that read, "All Night Dinner. Anything you can eat for a small price." So I told my wife, perfect, just what we were looking for. My wife got kind of confused and freaked out cause who would have an all-night diner in the middle of nowhere and to the side of the road? At that time, I didn't pay much attention to that cause I was starving and all I wanted was a nice meal. So I just brushed it off. We went inside the diner and got served real good. The waitress was very nice and all got to eat till we got stuffed. Being inside, I noticed the restaurant was a little old style. Nothing like a diner nowadays. Chairs, tables, everything looked outdated. And another weird thing we came to notice after we left the diner was that we were the only ones there. Well, after a nice meal, I got up to pay at the front register, which I found weird cause it was also outdated. It was one of those registers which they pull a lever down and it opens with a bell sound. thinking maybe it was just part of the restaurant and they wanted to keep everything old-fashioned. I brushed it off, but where in the world would they find an outdated register nowadays? Another weird thing was the waitress had no cell phone and had an old-fashioned hairstyle that nobody uses nowadays. Well, to make a long story short, I took out two $20 bills to pay thinking maybe it was going to be a little expensive, but to our surprise, the whole bill came out to almost $10. I told the cashier if she was sure that was the total since we ate a lot and got stuffed with a lot of food. She said yes, that's the total. As I handed her a $20 bill, I told her to keep the change as a tip, since it was worth it. She couldn't thank us enough since to her it was a very generous tip. So she thanked us and invited us to return whenever we passed by. After we were back on the road, we were so satisfied and happy because of the good customer service we had. Talking of coming back real soon, since it was just like 2 hours from home. 2 weeks later, we decided to pay another visit to that old-fashioned diner. But this time it was during the day. We went, but to our surprise, we drove around back and forth and we couldn't find the diner. We were so dumbfounded cause a couple of weeks earlier the diner was there. There was no way we could have missed it. All we found was the ruins of a very old building. No roof, no windows, just the falling old walls and overgrown grass. I scratched my head thinking maybe I was in the wrong place or town. But no, I was in the right place in town. All we could see was that old building in ruins. So kind of perplexed, I stopped a local and asked about that diner, and the local got shocked and asked us, "How did you know there was a diner here?" And I said, "Wait a minute, what do you mean was?" Supposedly we ate dinner there a couple of weeks ago. The local said that the place got burned down by a fire more than 40 years ago, and all the workers perished in that fire. I started to shake my head in disbelief and exclaimed to the local that it was not possible since we had a very good meal almost 2 weeks ago. The local said he had proof of he was saying. So he got out his cell phone and opened a news app and searched that diner and showed us where it mentioned the fire and the diner. He also came up with the photos of the people who perished in the fire, and there was the kind waitress who attended us that night. So scared and confused, we thanked the locals for the info, got in the car, and drove out of that town in a hurry. My wife and I were so scared and in shock trying to comprehend the experience we went through. I'm scared cause I remember vividly that night, and no wonder everything seemed outdated. But what happened to us that night? Did we go into a time warp and end up back in time when the diner was in full function? Or did we come face to face with phantoms? This happened back in December 2014. Has anyone had any curiosity of dialing a very old phone number and seeing what happens? Well, my husband had the genius idea of doing that. One Sunday afternoon, dying of boredom, we got the wise idea of doing that. But before doing that, we chatted for quite a while, and he told me that from the years 1982 to 1988, he always called his grandparents over in Reynosa, Mexico, and he always had a long conversation with them. Nowadays, that phone number no longer exists and grandparents are now deceased. I was perplexed that he could remember that number after over 40 years. So just for the fun of it, he grabbed his cell phone and dialed that number to see who it belonged to and talk to whoever owned that number and have a conversation with them. After a few rings, and to my husband's surprise, he recognized the male voice answering at the other end of the line. He had the cell phone on speaker, and I heard the male voice too and asked my husband, "Who is it?" And he turned pale and started to stutter. So the male voice at the other end spoke again. "Hello, who is this? Who you want to talk to?" My husband, all shook up, overcame his impression and answered the male voice and asked the male voice, "Is that you, Grandpa? How is this possible? You've been dead for almost 25 years. My husband told him, "It's me, Grandpa, Joe." And the male voice said, "What kind of joke is this? My little Joe is right here by my side. Who do you want to talk to?" My husband got so dumbfounded and shocked and by accident hung up the call. Shaking, he explained to me that the male voice was his grandpa and the background child voice was himself. But how in the world was that possible? It was as if there was a tape recorder playing a recorded tape from many years ago. So after my husband calmed down, he tried to dial the number again, but to his surprise, operator came on stating that the number is disconnected and is no longer in service. So now my husband tries to use boredom a whole different way. I grew up in Texas. I was around 7 or 8 at the time this occurred, and I've never heard of anyone having a similar experience. It was maybe 2 or 3 in the morning, and I was sleeping on the couch in the living room at my parents' home. What woke me up at that time was a very loud moaning sound coming from outside the house. But it wasn't from a single source, it was a lot of loud voices doing the same sound. I got up to peek outside, still laying on the couch, which was next to the window. What I saw is very difficult to explain. So the easiest way to say it is I saw 100s, possibly 1,000s of ghosts all screaming like the hounding wind, but multiplied. They were all going in the same direction, west, and I was looking at them out the window as they went towards my left. They looked like empty, white plastic bags from the grocery store, all floating upside down next to each other, only a little bigger, and were fading when you looked at where their legs were supposed to be, looking like maybe a tethered sheet is the closest I can resemble. They were moving fast, maybe 30 or 40 miles an hour, or faster, like it was a highway. A highway of ghosts passing by our house, across all the way to my neighbor's house. It scared me bad that I quickly laid back down, covered myself with the blanket, and I don't know how I went back to sleep, but I did. The next day, I woke thinking I imagined it, or that it was a nightmare. So, I kind of blew it off. About a week or 2 later, it was the weekend, and I went to spend the night at my sister's house to hang out with my nephew, who was a year younger than me. We played outside, played video games, all that stuff you do when you're a kid at a sleepover. But that night, at about the same time, the same sound woke me up. I was sleeping in his room, and his bed was next to the window, so I just looked out and saw them again. They were all screaming again. Everything was the same except they were headed northwest this time, and I was looking at them go away from me. I thought to myself, I'm going to keep looking this time. And I did for a bit, until I realized that they were moving so fast if one saw me it would be up in my face in a split second because of how fast they were moving. That scared me even more than I was, so I looked away, covered myself, and even though I could still hear them, somehow I went to sleep. After that second incident, I believe there are supernatural occurrences in this world. I've had other sightings, but not like that one. I've never heard anything like that happening anywhere, and it feels like it's possible that's how ghosts move. Most ghost stories I've heard involve one or maybe a few ghosts in a house. Because of all the ones I saw, it was only in a matter of a few seconds or maybe a minute or 2. Maybe that's what happens to ghosts when they aren't in a single location. I don't know. But I wish there was more information on this supernatural event because I've found none.